Cool. So we're in office hour. We're going to do some algorithms, but before we do that, I wanted to show you one last terminal basic sort of thing to make sure that you guys are then wizard. I'm going to show you one's going to be elite, and one might stress you out. And if it stresses you out and I'm getting that, then we're just going to cancel and quit. So if you guys remember, I want to go to my coding dojo folder, all that stuff. I've got a little shortcut, and this is the second thing is I'm going to show you to make shortcuts. But let's say ILS, and I want to go into week 3. So if I CD into week 3, ILS, I've got lecture 2. So CD into lecture 2. I've got all these files, right? And this is what I want to open up. This is what we're going to do today. Well, in your terminal, and this is, you're going to have to set it up. If you're on a Mac, you're going to have to set it up, and I'm going to show you how to do it. And if you're on a Windows, this is the one time Windows is more elite than Mac, in my opinion. It's because by default, it already comes. Just kidding. I have a Windows and a Mac. I do prefer Mac, but I have both. But if I wanted to open this up, what I can type is this keyword of code. And then I can either put a space dot. Now, one thing you'll learn is anytime you put a space and then a singular dot, that just means all. So this is going to say, I want to open this folder and all the files in it. Or I could say index.html and specify a specific file. I want to have, because I got an HTML, a Markdown, a CSS, and a JavaScript in here, I want all files. So I'm going to say code dot. Now, when I do that, and I run this, it's actually going to open it up in VS Code for me. And we're going to see that here I have lecture 2 and all of my files, which is pretty elite. It's pretty nice, especially as you're navigating through your terminal, you're getting used to doing that. It is going to be something, it's going to be something that is super duper helpful. Now, if you're on a Mac, again, on Windows, this automatically comes because Microsoft is GitHub. In VS Code. Microsoft owns everything in the coding space, just so you know. ChatGPT, GitHub Copilot, GitHub, VS Code, like they are goated right now in development. But because of that, Windows, obviously, Microsoft, all good to go. If you are on a Mac, then you do Command-Shift-P, and it's going to pull this up, right? This is your preferences. And then you're going to type path. Now, yours probably isn't going to do that. I always show students so they see that. But if you just see path, it's going to come here. And you're just going to click this. And it's going to say shell command code successfully installed in path. Now, what that means is now you might have to cancel your terminal and then open it up again. But once you do that, now you can use that keyword of code, space dot, and it'll automatically open up in VS Code. Cool. Any questions on what we just talked about? Frank, our friend Siskus asked, are we supposed to push our repos from Git terminal specifically? So Git and GitHub are different. Git's going to create a repository. So the answer to the question is yes, but you need a tool to utilize it with. That's what we're talking about all today. So I'm not going to go over it now, but we will be using Git and another tooling service. We're going to use GitHub. There's other tooling services out there to push and connect your repositories. So you will need to do that. Cool. Now, the second thing I wanted to show you is there is the ability to create shortcuts within your terminal. Now, if you created a bash, so if you download Git, there's going to be a spot that you could, especially if you're on Windows, that's going to say, do you want to get a bash? Do you want to install Git bash as well? Say yes, because Git bash will allow you to kind of do the same things that I'm doing. You don't have to, but it is just another way that you can use Linux or Unix commands instead of using, like dir and all that stuff. You can use exactly what I use, and it's the same. It kind of emulates this. So I'm going to open this up real fast, and then I'm going to say this. Okay. So What you might have to do is create a file called ZSHRC if you are on a Mac, or usually it's bash RC if you're on a Windows. So what this is doing is this is going to open up wherever my ZSHRC file is. And you can Google where to create a .bash RC file. But this is going to open it up, and it's going to just be a text file. And so it might say like, hey, you don't have one. Then that's where you're going to have to create it. And then if you just go on a ChatGPT or you just Google where do I create or how to create .bash, how to create .bash RC file, boom. It tells you, you can just say touch bash RC, and there you go. Cool. Now, what this does is it allows you a place. Wow, good old grepper. Grepper is a cool tool. If you guys don't have it, it is it's just a free extension. And so anytime I do some sort of code, it'll automatically like bring up some code if I wanted it. So I can do that. Like if I have how to do something, it'll oftentimes give me a code answer and people can upvote it, and it's just kind of built in at the top instead of you having to go in and ask ChatGPT. You're going to Stack Overflow. It's a cool tool. And then I've got this generative AI, which is from Google, which is on their Search Labs. You just go to Search Labs and you click this guy. I want generative AI, and it does. It actually is pretty cool, pretty helpful. AI, large language models are everywhere. Cool. So you would say touch bash RC. Now, what this allows you to do, and this is why I think it's awesome and I want to show people, is that it allows you to create variables, and or the way you can think about it is a shortcut, right? So instead of me having to type open tilde slash dot ZSHRC, I got to remember all that. I can just say, when I want to go to this file, I want to edit. And so now if I were to just say, let me cancel this. If I were to say edit, it brings up this file. What it does is every time my terminal, I say a keyword, it comes here, and then it runs this right here. So I've got a really long, yep, sorry, I see your message. I can speak a little bit slower. I just drank some decaf coffee, so I'm rocking and rolling, but I'll cool it down a little bit. Whenever I say edit, that's going to come and run this command, right? And so you can sort of think about it just again as a shortcut. This is really going to come in handy when you start dealing with environments like Python. You're going to have environment variables. And so instead of having to say all of this, I just say pyenv, and that creates an environment. We're not going to go over environments now. You'll go over that in Python if you take it. You can do that. If I wanted to run server, I was finding myself saying the same thing over and over. Python 3 manage.py run server. I can just type rs, and it's going to do the whole thing for me. Now you can get to where, like I do this one, I create one for most of my classes. And so instead of me having to navigate, somebody said, don't you have to remember where everything is at? You could, or I create something called an alias, which is our environment. We'll go, or our variable, sorry. We'll go over how we create that in a second. But I just put WF, and that'll get me all the way from desktop to Coding Dojo, Instruction CD, and then into July 23rd web fund. So this is our class, right? And so all I have to type is this instead of typing all of this. And we'll show you right here. I just type WF. Oh, I'm in lecture 2 already. So CD, oops, sorry. Now I'm back in on here, and I just type WF, and it takes me to web fund already. And if I say PWD, it's much faster than saying CD and then typing all of these. Cool. So the way we create these is we use this keyword of alias. In the same way that in JavaScript, we use the keyword of function to create a function, or var, or let, or const. When we're dealing with these files, ZSHRC or a bash RC, we use the keyword of alias, and that's saying, okay, great. I'm creating an alias, I'm declaring it, and this is the alias name. So it's edit. And then what I want it to do is this right here. Now, You want to make sure that you don't have spaces, because I've tried it with spaces. So like space or edit space equals space open ZSHRC, and it didn't work. So I always default, maybe there's something else you can do, or command. I just default to not. So once I say alias, and then this is all just sort of one thing. So yeah, that's all you do for an alias. Any questions on that? And then once this is edited, you do have to save it because it's just a file. So I do Command S or Control S, and it'll save the file. So once you do something, you do have to save it. So just a heads up there. Are there any questions on aliases or what we're talking about here? It's a little bit more advanced. I fully understand that. Somebody asked, do you memorize your aliases? I actually do memorize my aliases. I mean, it's fairly easy when I'm dealing with Coding Dojo stuff. I just type WF or PB, or sometimes I'll go in, and when I'm doing MERN, I had a MERN one. I actually just got rid of it to do PB. But yeah, I do sort of just memorize them. And if I forget, I can just always type edit real fast and then go and remind myself. But I do memorize it. You could, if you wanted to have it as a reference list, you totally could. But in the same way of having it a reference list, if you just do this guy right here, you could always just use this as your reference. Like, what was it? And then you go in and find it. Great question. Any other questions so far? Let me make this a little bit bigger so you guys can see. Okay. Somebody said, is it local? So it's local on my computer. So it's just on my computer. It's like if I were to say CSHRC file, let's see if I can find it on my computer. No. Believe it is at the highest level. So if I were to say from here, and then I say ls, it's a long time ago I set it up. It's not here. It's not on my desktop. No. I'll have to find exactly where it's at on my computer, and I can let you guys know. Okay. Great. The second thing I wanted to show you is I did find myself having to do the same thing over and over. So one thing, let me clear this, is if I go to Web Fund and I maybe want to make let's say that this was 5 weeks, right? I could make dir week 5, and then right after I make dir, if I want to go into it, what would I have to do? Yeah, I'd have to ls and see what's available. But if I wanted to go into week 5, what would I have to do? Yeah, I'd have to cd into it, right? So it's kind of a 2-step process. Every time I make a folder, I make a dir, and then I go and I have to cd into that folder. Well, what you can also do, and I don't act like I have the most powerful, I'm sure there's a lot more things you could do. This is great for me, is you can also create functions in your ZSHRC in your file. So what these functions will do is it's a step-by-step guide of saying, okay, once you do this and it takes in some values, then I want you to do blank, right? So what I can do is I have this function and I use this the most frequently. This is the most frequent thing that I use, is I called it mkcd, and that's for making a directory and then cding into it. You can call it whatever you want, but you say function, and then you say the function name, and it's got a parentheses. Now, though the function will take in something, you don't have to put like val1, val2. You don't have to do that, right? Then it looks very similar to JavaScript. We got an open and close bracket. And then what you're going to do is you're going to say step by step what exactly you want it to do. So in this case, I wanted to make a directory. Let's just ignore this $1 for a second. I want to make a directory. And then once it's done making it, I want to cd into that directory. Now, you might ask yourself, what is this $1 doing? Well, when we're wanting to refer or give a name to a function, this is going to be the first word given after this command. What do I mean by that? If I say mkcd week 5, week 5 is going to be represented in my function as $1. If I had a week 6, this would be represented. If I ran this, if I had a function that took in 2 names, this would be represented by $2, and so on and so forth, right? And so what if I am running this, I'm saying, hey, I want you to make a directory called week 5. That's what I passed in. And then once that's done, because there's a colon, or semicolon, once that's done, let's cd into week 5. So cd into what I just made. So now, instead of me having to make dir and then cd, I can just do this. And now I'm already in week 5 because it makes my directory and then it cds straight into it. This function I genuinely use probably every day. Now you could get more advanced if you want. Like here is one where I do have, back in the day when we used to teach Django instead of Flask for Python. And what we'd have to do is we'd have to create an environment variable. So I had my py-env, so it goes up here and it runs this. Then it would do Django admin start project, and I would say Django temp, and I would pass in 2 values. I would have my project name and then my app name, right? And so it would run, create the project, or so it would do start project. I'd cd into the project created. It would create a get ignore file, which we're going to talk about today. Then I'd cd into that name again. And then I'd create a secrets file, because when Django admin, it would create multiples. And I'd cd back. So I'd go back, and then I'd run the start app with my second name. I'd cd into that. I'd create some files. I would go back, and then it will code it. So let me show you that in action. So let's say Django, what did I call it? Oops. We called it Django temp. Might take a second. Django temp testy mech tester. Jango. Did I spell that wrong? DJ ANGO. DJ8. Oh, I forgot the G. We can go up. Oh, I deleted my environment. So it didn't activate my environment, but just based off me doing that, you can see I have all of this stuff. I have this get ignore. I got this manage py in this folder. I've got all of these that it automatically made in this folder. I've got these, all this information. So it's just a way that we can automate a lot of our stuff. You don't have to do that. If that overwhelmed you, do not at all worry about it. This is like an advanced, just fun thing that you can do. but not at all necessary. If you never, ever, ever look at this, then you don't have to. Like, it doesn't matter. Cool. Let me go remove. Anybody remember how I removed the week 5 folder? RM. That's just for a file. What do I have to do for a folder? Not -1. Good job, Roberta. RF. And then folder name. Week 5 is now gone. Perfect. So let's see the end of week 3. We're in lecture 2. Perfect. Okay. Any questions? I realize that took a lot longer than I anticipated, but are there any questions on what we did here? Did this make sense, or was this just also very confusing? Christina, have you ever used these aliases?
I have not, but I know what I'm doing after class.
Yeah, it's spend 5 hours to automate something that'll take 5 seconds. Typical dev. That's what we do. Yeah, it's a cool tool to, like, I don't know, navigate or create fun functions. If you keep doing your same thing over and over again, like I used to have back in the day, I would just use this web temp. Honestly, I forgot I had it, and it'll just create everything for me. It's pretty sweet.
Yeah, we had somebody come in and they were like, "You want to see some magic?" And I was like, "Oh yeah." And it literally made their whole initial like Python template and started it. I was like, "What?"
Yeah, you can like echo like we used to have an instructor. Once I showed him, his name was Bill. He was incredible. But he made it to where you can kind of add and say, like, I want to write stuff and I want it to do set. So anything that you were wanting, you could just like have a template and just say, here you go, like MERN, and it would open up everything, and you'd have connections, PY, and all this. Yeah, cool. Well, then I usually show people that just as a to say that we did, but not at all. Again, not at all necessary for what we're doing and what we're moving forward with. So